I don't see that autism itself as a negative thing. He can learn to overcome things that are a challenge.
I wanted them to learn from the children around them, and I wanted those children to be what every child is.
The children in his class have been explained to them why Max is a bit different, and the children stand by Max now because they understand the difficulties that he sometimes has.
Autism spectrum disorders are a range of neurological disorders that affects a person's ability to communicate and interact socially. Coping with ASD can take a lot of time and patience.
I'm Susan Sherrard. I'm a team leader for CCS Disability Action. My experience is that inclusive education is really important and a fundamental grounding for children and people with disabilities, because it's the real world of the community that we live in.
New Zealand has over 40,000 people who are diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder. Nearly 5 times as many boys are diagnosed with ASD than girls. With twin boys, the Leon family had a strenuous time managing 2 children without explanation of their behaviour.
I'm a Kiwi Canadian. My mum's from New Zealand, my dad's from Canada. I was born in Canada and we lived there for the first 10 years of my life. Met my husband in British Columbia, in Kelowna, and we had the twins. We didn't know it was autism until they were nearly 6. We didn't have a diagnosis, but really from birth we knew that there was something just not quite right.
You just kind of get into this situation where you start thinking your kids are the only ones behaving that way, and you start thinking, oh, well, you're not doing something right, and you need to do something extra all the time. And then you talk to other parents, or you see other kids in action, and you realize, well, that's just natural. That's what the kids are doing.
Just from the very beginning, they were a little bit behind in their milestones, and they weren't alert as much as they should. They slept a lot. They were inconsolable.
I spilled the juice.
You spilled the juice.
Because we were, like I said, going through to pediatricians and psychologists, and yeah, I guess the shocking as far as basically going into one of those meetings and saying, well, what kind of things are you doing with the boys? How are you treating them? And having a situation where they wanted to film us and see how we were behaving and interacting with the children, as if it was something to do with that behavior rather than who the children were.
I'm Jennifer Eugenitz, married to Ernie, grandmother to Max and James.
You could communicate with them. They would understand you mostly, but you couldn't understand them. And so they would get frustrated, and then you'd get frustrated. You'd have to say, time out, hang on, what's actually going on here?
Always knew there was something, but it was a relief to put a name to it. We were no longer anxious, really. We now can move forward.
If I was Emma and Will and didn't have the support, I don't know how you'd cope, to be honest. Because to me it would be critical. Because they need their own time, their own space, and they need to be able to have the confidence that that support is total support.
ASD has also affected the lives of Selena and David. Their son Max has Asperger's syndrome, which is a mild form of autism. Max also has a twin sister, Caitlin, who doesn't have ASD.
We're from England, so I was born in Dorset in England, and Dave, my husband, and I met when we were doing nurse training, so emigrated 6 years ago. Max and Caitlin are the twins. They were born 17 months after Alicia. Alicia's our eldest and she's just turned 9. And then Finn is our last born son, and he was, like I say, he was born in New Zealand. He's just about to turn 4. Having had a daughter previously, she was 17 months old when the twins were born. Everything went well with our twin pregnancy. But probably by about the age of about 18 months old, I realised that Max probably wasn't hitting all the milestones that he should have been, and I felt that there was something that wasn't quite right.
The thing that we both picked up was the lack of eye contact. The other thing that we noticed was development of speech was a little bit slow.
Tell me about this skateboard. Why is it so special?
Because it's a special new kind. Some people don't have this board yet.
We had various tests done, and then they finally sort of came to the conclusion that perhaps ADHD was a factor. but I still felt there was something else. And it wasn't until we actually transferred and immigrated to New Zealand that they followed up with some more paediatrician appointments, and that's when we got the tentative diagnosis of autism, stroke Asperger's.
Kindy came about around when they were 2.5. I tried to get them in somewhere for a day, and that's when we first took them to drop-off kindy. And when I got back there, the people who ran the kindy sort of said, "Did I talk to my children?" Yeah, you know, because you should say things like, you know, "Here's your foot, put your foot in your shoe." And I thought, well, I say that all the time, but because the boys didn't respond in a way that a child of that age would normally respond to that, even they sort of picked up in one day that things weren't quite normal.
In this society, we don't fully include people who are different. When somebody sees me and I use my wheelchair, then they know that I have an impairment. For somebody who doesn't have that obvious impairment, I think there's an expectation that they will behave or act or speak or think in a certain way. And if that isn't the case, then there may be kind of, I guess, a double whammy or a different expectation really, and then they might experience a more blatant kind of exclusion or discrimination.
We sort of got to a point where there had been so much intervention with the boys. Every time you saw a doctor, you saw a chart and you saw what children of their age were supposed to be doing, and you saw what the boys were actually doing. And yet, really, at the end of the day, nothing coming out of it. No weekly sessions of anything that had any benefit that we could see.
I think there are a number of different kinds of barriers that they face. There's so many challenges for families to understand and to sort of find their way through the number of different services and different people involved in their lives.
And there was all this focus on what they weren't achieving and what they weren't doing. And it gets really, it gets you down after a while.
We live here in Waimaku, and myself and Andrea, who I met in the Air Force very early on, and our 3 boys, Callum, Logan and George.
Callum was born here in Auckland, and when he was just a couple of weeks old we noticed that he had an eye defect. So from then we started seeing specialists on a regular basis, and then his autism was picked up when he was just over 2. With his eye condition, often was accompanied by an intellectual or neurological impairment as well. And we'd been through some changes with moving house, and Callum struggled to cope with that at the age of 2.
Initially it was about the amount of time you had to spend doing the same thing with one compared to the other. After a while that just became the way it was. Now the ongoing thing is the whole fairness, the same standard and the same rules of behaviour for everybody. Sometimes that's a little hard to get right and a little hard to understand from the other side, I think, as well. When maybe you go, well, it's okay to just let something slide for one and not the other.
Logan was a very social, highly interactive, imaginative little boy, and we realised that Callum was lagging behind, and Logan, even though he was just over a year younger, exceeded Callum's development from quite an early age. With Logan, it was never a problem just to drop him off at daycare or kindergarten. He would be a little bit clingy, as other children are, and then just happily go off and make friends. But Callum was either extremely clingy or extremely blasé about whether I was around or not.
1, 3, 2, 1, go!
Activities like riding the go-kart are really good for building teamwork skills and getting all the kids to work together, and if they all work together they can achieve it.
One of the nice things around here is neighbourhood kids come and get involved in the team as well.
Yeah.
And even just while we were talking before, we had 2 of them come over and to play, because that's what they normally do this time in the afternoon. We'd have 1 or 2 over here.